He was a billionaire who thought he had everything until a lost brooch and three homeless children reminded him what truly mattered. When a blind boy returned what others would have stolen, a door opened not just to a forgotten memory, but to a family he never knew he needed. Before we begin, leave a comment below and let us know where you are watching from so we can say hello. Now let's get into the story. Ronnie Morgan, 42, was a man whose name stirred both admiration and awe across the skyscrapers of Chicago. The CEO of Morgan Dynamics, a tech empire spanning continents. Ronnie was known as a titan in business circles, a brilliant strategist with a mind wired for numbers and power plays. But beyond the headlines and magazine covers, behind the tailored suits and private jets, was a man shaped by a past few dared to imagine. He wasn't born with a silver spoon. His success didn't stem from inheritance, but from struggle, years of estrangement from a cold, domineering father who demanded perfection, and the quiet warmth of a mother who believed in dreams. Ronnie's ascent to power came at a price: loneliness wrapped in luxury, a fortress built from pride, and the constant echo of his mother's final words, "Wear this and remember who you are." She had handed him the golden ribbon-shaped brooch the morning he officially took over the company from his late father. It wasn't just jewelry, it was legacy, crafted delicately from gold and inscribed on the back with the word courage. It symbolized everything his mother wanted him to carry into his new life as a leader: strength, kindness, and above all, humanity. But as the years passed, something in Ronnie began to harden. The boardroom battles, the betrayals in business, the false friends, each chipped away at his softness until all that remained was a sharp mind and a guarded heart. The brooch remained with him, always pinned to the inside of his suit jacket, yet rarely seen. It was a quiet talisman, a whisper from a better time he no longer lived in. He had no wife, no children, and no real companions besides the staff that kept his schedule tight and his world quiet. To most, Ronnie Morgan was untouchable, a man whose gaze could silence a room and whose signature could build or break a future. It was just after 8:30 a.m. when the streets of downtown Chicago pulsated to the rhythm of a city that never slowed down. Ronnie Morgan stepped out of his sleek black Bentley, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement. His sleek army green overcoat hugged his body, shielding him from the morning chill. His assistant followed, rattling off names times figures, but Ronnie wasn't listening. His mind was 10 floors ahead, navigating the maze of meetings and market decisions that awaited him at Morgan Tower. His expression was unreadable as always. Years of steering a billion-dollar company had taught Ronnie the art of detachment. He was focused, sharp, and fiercely private. On his lapel, nearly hidden beneath the folds of his jacket, was a small golden brooch, shaped like a ribbon, delicate, gleaming faintly in the morning light. It was a personal piece. He never spoke of something no assistant dared to ask about. To Ronnie, it was sacred, yet in that moment, he didn't realize it had come loose. As he crossed a side street near the plaza, the brooch slipped silently from his coat and landed beside a storm drain, nestled between a crack in the pavement and a discarded coffee cup. Unnoticed. Forgotten. He didn't look down. He didn't feel its absence. The wind picked up, rustling his hair slightly, as he adjusted his grip on the leather folder under his arm and strode toward the revolving doors of his skyscraper. Just like every other morning, he disappeared into the glass and steel that defined his empire. But not far behind him, just around the corner from the manicured plaza, 3 pairs of small eyes watched him go. Beneath the towering skyline and glass panel giants of Chicago, there existed a world few acknowledged, a world lived in the cracks of the city, behind alley dumpsters, beneath overpasses, and in half-lit corners of forgotten parks. It was in this world that Liam, Zoe, and Noah survived. Not older brother and younger siblings, but triplets, all 8 years old, born just minutes apart, yet now worlds away from the security most children took for granted. Their days were stitched together by instinct, whispers, and routines, shaped by desperation. Every morning they woke tucked beneath a weathered tarp near the edge of Monroe Park, huddled close for warmth, the concrete beneath them unforgiving. Liam was the one who often scouted ahead, keeping watch. Zoe, sharp-eyed and quick-witted, looked for food or things others discarded. And Noah, sweet, quiet, and blind, stayed close to the center of their little circle, his hand always reaching for one of theirs. They hadn't always lived like this. There were faint, hazy memories of soft beds and bedtime stories of a mother's scent and warm soup. But ever since the fire, ever since the night their world went up in smoke, no one had come to claim them. No family, no system, no safety, only each other. They had tried the shelters once, but shelters meant questions, paperwork, and worse, separation. An official once said they'd need to be placed in different foster homes. Zoe had cried so hard her voice went hoarse. Liam had grabbed Noah's hand and fled before the papers were signed. From that day on, they vowed, sure, we stay together, no matter what. It wasn't easy. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs most nights. Some days they lived on a single shared sandwich. Other days they didn't eat at all. Zoe once found a nearly full water bottle in a trash can and swore it was a gift from heaven. They were careful, smart. They trusted no one. But Noah was different. Though blind since birth, he saw things the others couldn't, not with his eyes, but with his fingers, his ears, his heart. While Liam and Zoe thought in terms of survival, what to eat, where to sleep, Noah thought in feelings, in hunches, in instincts. He knew when to turn left instead of right. He sensed when danger was near. And more than once he'd stop them from walking into situations that felt wrong. Sometimes Noah once said, sitting quietly beneath a broken street lamp, the world hums. I just follow the sound. It was that same Noah, that same soft voice, who now cradled the golden brooch in his palm, unaware of its worth but certain of its meaning. It's important, he whispered. It doesn't belong with us. We have to find its way back. And though Zoe's stomach rumbled and Liam looked away in frustration, they both nodded. Because when Noah spoke like that, they always listened. Rain had fallen lightly the night before, leaving behind small puddles that reflected the gray sky like broken mirrors. Early morning traffic rumbled in the distance as Liam, Zoe, and Noah made their way through the quieter side streets of the loop, sticking close to the buildings where awnings kept the concrete mostly dry. The triplets, each just 8 years old, moved in quiet unison, Zoe leading with eyes sharp and alert, Liam scanning the sidewalks for anything useful, and Noah walking between them, one hand held out, fingertips grazing the walls as he walked. They weren't looking for treasure. They were looking for survival. As they turned a corner near the edge of a large office plaza, Zoe stopped abruptly. Wait, she whispered, kneeling near the curb. Nestled between a cracked tile and a sewer grate was something gold, a shimmer against the grit and grime of the street. She reached in and carefully pulled it out. It was a golden brooch, shaped like a ribbon, smooth and slightly warm from the morning sun. Its edges curled delicately like something crafted with care, not mass-produced. Zoe held it up, brushing dirt from its surface. Whoa, she breathed. This is real. Liam crouched beside her, his brows pulling together. It looks expensive, he murmured, running his finger along the curve of the pin. Gold, probably. Might get us a full meal, maybe even a motel room for a night. They both turned toward Noah, who stood quietly nearby, his head tilted as if listening to something deeper than the sounds of the city. Zoe gently placed the brooch into Noah's hands. He took it carefully, his thumbs tracing its contours, then pausing at the delicate engraving on the back letters he couldn't see but whose texture told him there was meaning there. A few seconds passed. Then Noah spoke. This isn't trash, he said softly, clutching the brooch to his chest. It's looking for someone. Liam frowned. It's in the gutter, Noah. I know, Noah replied, but it doesn't feel like trash. It feels like love, like someone gave it to it with a promise. Zoe's throat tightened. She glanced around as if the rightful owner might suddenly appear from behind a glass door or newspaper stand. But the plaza was empty except for a few rushing commuters. We could sell it, Liam said again, but his voice wavered now. Noah simply shook his head. It's not meant for us. The weight of that sentence settled over all three of them. Zoe looked down at the golden piece in Noah's hands and sighed. Then we'll find out who it belongs to, she said quietly. They didn't know it yet, but that small, spontaneous choice to return something beautiful, in a world that had taken so much from them, was the first thread in a story that would stitch together their broken past and someone else's forgotten heart. And somewhere high above, in a sleek glass tower, Ronnie Morgan was about to feel the first tug of that thread. Beneath the dull morning light, the triplets found shelter beneath a concrete awning, just a few blocks from where the golden brooch had been discovered. The air carried the scent of city steam and wet pavement, and the hum of traffic echoed all around them. But in their small corner time felt suspended, 3 8-year-olds born into the same minute, now facing a choice far bigger than themselves. Zoe sat cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, cradling the brooch in her palm like it was made of glass. She kept glancing at it, trying to decide if it was hope or temptation. If we sell it, she said, we could eat more than crackers tonight. We could get hot food, maybe even find that lady who gives out warm blankets near the shelter. Liam stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes darting up and down the street. Or we get caught with something this nice and end up in way more trouble than a cold night. Noah sat quietly between them, his hands open on his lap, waiting. Zoe looked at him and unsure. Noah, can you feel anything else? Without a word, Noah held out his hands. She gently placed the brooch in them. Noah's fingers moved slowly, reverently over the curves of the ribbon. His thumbs ran across the engraved letters on the bottom, tiny and smooth. His breathing slowed. His expression changed. It's not just gold, he whispered. It's something someone wore close to their heart. Not to show off, but to remember. He paused, fingertips brushing the clasp. A woman gave it. She gave it to someone she loved, like a goodbye, but also a promise. Liam frowned, uncomfortable with the quiet emotion of it all. You're just guessing. No, Noah said softly. It feels warm, not like sun warm, but like memory warm. Zoe's eyes glistened. You really think it's that important? Noah nodded slowly. It matters to someone, like really matters. None of them spoke for a while. The sound of a siren passed in the distance. A dog barked from across the street. But in that moment, their small space held only the silence of understanding. Liam finally sat down beside his siblings and stared at the brooch. Then we don't sell it, he said. We find out who it belongs to. Somehow. Zoe nodded, even if it means giving it up. Noah smiled faintly. It's already starting to feel lighter. Unseen by them high above in a penthouse office with a view of the lake, Ronnie Morgan adjusted his jacket after a video call and blinked, sensing something missing, but not yet knowing what. The brooch may have left his possession, but its story had just found its new beginning. Ronnie Morgan rarely forgot things. His mind operated like a machine, efficient, methodical, and relentless. Details mattered. Precision mattered. And when your empire stretched across continents and your signature could shift markets, there was no room for error. But something felt off. It hit him late in the afternoon in the middle of a strategy meeting on the 37th floor of Morgan Tower. His executive team sat around the glass conference table pitching charts, projections, and words that barely registered in Ronnie's head. He adjusted the collar of his charcoal suit out of habit, and his hand brushed over the spot where the golden brooch should have been, just above the heart beneath the lapel. He froze. He checked again, more deliberately this time. Fingers searched the fabric, pressing into the fine wool. Nothing. A small chill crept into his chest. He straightened abruptly in his chair, interrupting the presentation mid-sentence. "Excuse me," he said, his voice sharper than usual. "Continue without me." The room fell silent as he exited, his long strides brisk and purposeful. He moved through the hallway and into his private office, shutting the door behind him. There, away from the glass walls and digital displays, Ronnie peeled off his suit jacket and inspected it inside and out. The brooch, his mother's golden ribbon, wasn't there. He stood still for a moment, staring at the coat in disbelief. That pin had never left him, not since the day his mother pressed it into his hands in the quiet foyer of their family home moments before he was named CEO. "This company was built on hard work, Ronnie," she had said, gently pinning the brooch to his chest. "But don't forget what it was built for, people, not power." That had been 12 years ago. And though life had grown louder and colder since then, he'd carried that brooch like a silent promise. And now it was gone. He searched the rest of the office, the meeting room, even the inside of his briefcase. But the brooch was nowhere to be found. Ronnie pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Jessica," he said, speaking to his assistant, "have the security team pull the footage from the garage and front entrance. Look for anything that shows what I dropped this morning." Jessica hesitated. "What are we looking for, sir?" Ronnie answered. "Gold, ribbon-shaped." There was a pause before she replied, "Yes, sir, I'll notify them immediately." He hung up and moved to the tall windows that overlooked the city. Below, people scurried like ants, unaware that somewhere in that chaos, a small but irreplaceable part of his soul had slipped away. Ronnie Morgan wasn't worried about the gold. He was mourning the last living memory of the woman who had once believed he still had a heart. Back at the edge of the plaza, the triplets sat together on the cold stone bench, their backs pressed against the wall of a shuttered cafe. It was nearing sunset now, and the light began to dim behind the tall buildings that cast long shadows across the concrete. The city moved around them fast and in different heels, clicking horns, honking voices blending into a busy blur. But the three 8-year-olds remained still clinging to something stronger than hunger or fatigue, hope. Liam hugged his knees, his eyes locked on the revolving doors of the tall glass building across the street, the same place they'd seen the man earlier that morning, the man with the sharp suit and serious eyes. The one who moved like the world waited on him. Liam didn't know his name. He just knew that something about the way he walked told you he was important. Zoe sat beside him, watching every person who entered or exited the building. She squinted, analyzing suits, briefcases, even their shoes, trying to find any detail that matched what she remembered. Her hands were buried in the front pocket of Noah's hoodie, where the brooch still lay wrapped in the corner of an old sock to keep it from scratching. Noah sat quietly between them, his hands resting in his lap, chin tilted up slightly toward the breeze. Though he could not see the crowd around him, he seemed to be listening, searching for something through the noise. His face looked calm, but Zoe could tell from the way his fingers twitched that he was nervous. "Do you think he'll come back?" Liam finally asked, not looking away from the doors. "I don't know," Zoe answered honestly. "But if he lost something this special, he has to notice eventually." "What if he doesn't?" Liam pressed. "What if he just doesn't care?" Noah spoke softly, his voice like the faintest echo. "He cares. I can feel it." The wind picked up slightly, tousling Zoe's messy ponytail. She glanced down at her scuffed sneakers. "What if we're wrong and this doesn't belong to him?" "Then we'll keep waiting," Noah said. "Because someone is missing it, and someone is hurting." They sat like that for what felt like hours, cold creeping into their bones, stomachs rumbling with emptiness and eyes stinging from tiredness. But still they stayed. No games, no fights, no complaints. Just three children, guarding something that wasn't theirs, because doing the right thing somehow felt like the only thing they had left. Across the street, behind the tinted windows of Morgan Tower, Ronnie Morgan paced inside his office, heart heavy with a loss he hadn't yet learned how to explain. And on the other side of the glass world he lived in, three small souls waited, hoping the man who'd dropped a piece of gold would come looking and find something far more valuable instead. Night was beginning to stretch across the city, casting a golden haze over the skyline as the sun disappeared behind towering glass giants. The streets sparkled with the glow of headlights and street lamps. But Ronnie Morgan saw none of it. He stood alone in the elevator of Morgan Tower, one hand gripping the polished chrome rail, the other clenched tightly around nothing. The absence of the brooch, his mother's brooch, still pressed on him like a bruise that refused to fade. He had checked his office, his car, the hallway carpets, the conference room. The security footage was being combed through, but nothing had turned up yet. Still, there was one place left, the plaza. He had crossed it that morning on his way in, distracted and late phone ringing, thoughts far from grounded things like jewelry. But now it felt like the only thread left to follow. He didn't tell his driver. He didn't call an assistant or security detail. Instead, Ronnie stepped out of the building on foot, the wind biting slightly as it swept through the streets. His coat flared with each gust, but he didn't seem to notice. His pace was steady, urgent, as if he were walking towards something more than just a piece of gold. The plaza looked different now, quieter, calmer, lit by the soft orange spill of lamps and the occasional flicker of passing headlights. He scanned the pavement with sharp eyes, following the same path he'd taken hours earlier. His footsteps echoed over the tiles as he crouched near the curb, scanning the edges of the sidewalk where the gutter met the concrete. He peered into shadows, lifted a few stray leaves, even stooped to inspect the edge of a drain. Nothing. He exhaled slowly, frustration creeping in. How could something that meant so much just vanish? He straightened, running a hand through his hair. For a moment, he felt like a boy again, back in the hallways of his childhood home, looking for a note his mother had left in his lunchbox, something he'd tossed away too quickly now, desperately wanting it back. Then movement caught his eye. Across the street, barely illuminated beneath the faded lights of a closed cafe, sat three children. They didn't look up. They weren't playing or begging. They were just sitting, huddled close, quiet still. Something about them made him pause. Ronnie took a step toward the crosswalk, his heart beating faster. He didn't know why, but something pulled him back, deep and unspeakable. As he waited for the light to change, he stared at the boy in sunglasses sitting in the middle, The boy in an old hoodie, his head tilted, as if listening to the wind. Ronnie had no way of knowing that inside that hoodie resting gently on the boy's chest was exactly what he was looking for. And that before nightfall, his world would collide with theirs in a way neither of them could have expected. Zoe's teeth chattered slightly as the night air grew colder. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, but she didn't complain. She kept her eyes locked on the towering building across the street, silently counting every person who exited and faded into the flow of the city. Most moved with purpose, head down, phone out, rushing towards somewhere warm. But one man didn't. She saw him the moment he stepped into the plaza again. Tall, sharp coat, movements tense but careful, scanning the ground like he was chasing a ghost. Zoe's breath caught in her throat. Her instincts flared that was him. She leaned forward slightly, her heart thumping harder with each step he took toward the gutter. She watched as he bent down near the storm drain, inspecting something small, then moved again, still searching. Zoe turned to Noah, who sat beside her on the stone bench, legs crossed, head tilted up as if listening to the wind. She leaned close and whispered in his ear, "Noah, there's a man across the street. He's looking. He keeps checking the ground. Right where we found the brooch." Noah didn't answer immediately. He remained still, then slowly shifted his head in the direction she mentioned. "Is it the man we saw this morning?" he asked quietly. Zoe nodded. "I think so. Same coat, same walk, same face that doesn't look at anybody." Noah's fingers gently brushed the edge of his hoodie pocket. The brooch wrapped in the soft cotton of an old sock was still there. Its weight, small as it was, had been growing heavier by the hour. Liam stood a few feet away, tapping his worn sneakers against the ground and blowing into his hands for warmth. "What's going on?" he asked under his breath, seeing Zoe's narrowed eyes. "There's a guy," she said. "I think he's the one who dropped the pin." Liam glanced toward the plaza, immediately on edge. "Are you sure?" "Not completely," Zoe said, "but he's not walking like everyone else. He's searching." Noah clutched the fabric over his pocket, thoughtful. "Does he look like someone who's hurting?" Zoe looked again. The man had paused, now standing still in the middle of the plaza, his face tilted up to the sky as if replaying something only he could see. There was something in his eyes, a mix of frustration, sadness, and longing, like he wasn't just looking for an object, but for a missing piece of himself. "Yeah," she whispered. "He looks like someone who lost something important." Noah turned his face slightly toward the street. "Then maybe he's the one we're supposed to give it back to." The three of them remained quiet for a beat. Then Zoe shifted forward, alert. "He's crossing," she said. "Coming this way." As Ronnie stepped onto the crosswalk, the city's noise seemed to fade, and something invisible, something bigger than them, all began pulling the two worlds together. The moment Ronnie stepped onto the other side of the street, he slowed. His polished shoes clicked softly against the pavement as he approached the bench where the three children sat. In the dim orange glow of the nearby streetlight, their small forms looked fragile, too small to be alone, too still to be sleeping. But their eyes were open, watching. Ronnie hesitated just a few feet away. He wasn't used to approaching strangers, let alone children, sitting alone at night on the edge of a plaza. A part of him questioned the impulse. What was he expecting, that they had somehow found it? That a piece of his past was waiting for him on a sidewalk bench? Still, something in his chest pulled him forward. He opened his mouth, searching for the right words. He wasn't even sure what he was going to ask when a soft voice broke the silence before he could speak. "Are you looking for something, Sir?" Ronnie blinked, startled. The boy in the center, slight frame, calm posture, pale eyes that didn't quite land on his face, had spoken. Though blind, he sat with a stillness that felt purposeful, almost knowing. His tone was gentle, not fearful. Honest. Ronnie took a slow breath. "Yes," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I think I may have dropped something here this morning." Zoe leaned forward, slightly protective. Liam stiffened at her side. But Noah's expression remained the same, calm, open, as though he'd been expecting this conversation all day. "Something small?" Noah asked. "Something gold?" Ronnie's heart skipped. His eyes sharpened. "Yes," he replied carefully. "It was a brooch. Gold, shaped like a ribbon." He didn't realize how much his voice trembled until the words left his mouth. The air between them changed. Zoe glanced at Liam, who gave a tiny nod. Slowly, without saying a word, Zoe reached into the front pocket of Noah's hoodie and unwrapped the cloth bundle. Inside lay the golden brooch, still polished, still intact. It caught the streetlight just enough to sparkle softly in her hand. "We didn't break it," Zoe said quietly. "He said it didn't belong to us." Ronnie stared at it speechless. His throat tightened as the past flooded back, his mother's hands, her warm voice, the way she'd pressed the pin into his chest and said, "This will remind you who you are." He crouched slowly in front of them, eyes locked on the piece. "You found this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Noah nodded. "We were going to give it back. We were just waiting for someone who looked like they missed it." For a long moment, Ronnie didn't speak. His eyes were glassy, overwhelmed, not just by the return of the brooch, but by who had found it, how they had treated it, and why they hadn't kept it. He looked at the three children, hungry, cold, but honest, and something in him cracked. "You waited all this time?" he asked softly. "Yes, sir," Noah said, because it felt like home to someone. And for the first time in years, Ronnie Morgan felt something in his chest that wasn't emptiness. It was gratitude and the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. Ronnie Morgan had crouched down to eye level with the triplets, but now moved by something he couldn't explain. He did something he hadn't done in years. He sat beside strangers on a cold public bench. The polished fabric of his expensive overcoat creased as he lowered himself, but he didn't care. Not about the chill, not about the damp bench, not even about the curious glances from passers-by. His eyes stayed fixed on the three children huddled beside him. He gently took the brooch from Zoe's open palm, holding it as if it were made of glass. For a long time, no one spoke. The city buzzed around them, but their small corner of the plaza felt like its own quiet island. Then, in a voice more human than he was used to hearing himself use, Ronnie asked, "What are your names?" Liam hesitated, exchanging a look with Zoe, who gave a slight nod. "I'm Liam," he said cautiously, puffing up his chest a little. "This is Zoe and that's Noah." Ronnie's eyes moved to each of them as they were introduced, and when he looked at Noah, the boy gave him a gentle smile, still holding steady in that serene, otherworldly way. "You three, your siblings?" Ronnie asked. "We're triplets," Zoe said, brushing a wisp of hair behind her ear. "Born the same morning, just minutes apart." Ronnie blinked. "Triplets," he echoed like the word had weight. "That's rare." "Yeah," Liam said, his voice dropping. "But we don't really feel special." Ronnie shifted slightly, his posture softening. "Can I ask, why are you here alone?" Zoe lowered her gaze. "We've been alone for almost a year. Our parents are gone," Liam added after a moment of silence. "In a car accident. On their way home from selling fruit at a small market, a truck hit them and wouldn't stop." "They didn't make it," Zoe whispered. Ronnie swallowed hard. I'm so sorry. We tried to go to the shelter," Liam continued, "but they said they couldn't keep us together. They wanted to split us up," Zoe said quickly, almost like it was a crime. "Put us in different homes." "Noah got scared," Liam said, "and we ran. We've been running ever since." Ronnie turned to Noah, who hadn't spoken again, but sat with his head slightly bowed, listening with perfect stillness, his small hands folded neatly in his lap. "Why didn't you tell someone, ask for help?" Ronnie asked gently. Zoe's eyes narrowed. "Most people don't listen when kids ask for help. They just see dirty clothes and think we're trouble," Liam added bitterly. "We tried once," Noah finally spoke, his voice soft but clear. "A lady said she'd take us in. Then she locked us in a room and tried to get money for us. We had to break out the window." Ronnie's chest tightened. He looked down at the golden brooch still in his hand. It had meant so much to him because of his mother, because of what it represented. But what these children had held on to, it was more than a memory. It was a decision, a choice to do right when they had every reason not to. "You've been on the streets this whole time?" he asked, almost not believing it. Zoe nodded. "We move around, park benches, old construction sites, sometimes the back steps of stores. We take turns staying awake at night, just in case." Ronnie was quiet for a long time. The wind blew gently across the plaza, ruffling the edges of his coat, and he looked up at the tower bearing his name rising high and silent above them. All that power, all that wealth, and here were three children, 8 years old, surviving with nothing but each other and the strength in their small voices. "You didn't sell it," Ronnie said finally, holding up the brooch. "You could have. You probably needed the money more than I can imagine." Noah tilted his face towards him. It felt like it mattered to someone, not just because it was gold, but because it held something important, something about love. Ronnie looked away, blinking fast. That was exactly what it held. A piece of his mother, a piece of who he was before he became the man who let numbers matter more than people. For the first time in years, Ronnie felt the sharp sting of humility settle in his throat. And maybe also the beginning of something else, something unfamiliar, something close to warmth. He turned back to the children. Would you be okay if I asked you more questions, or maybe got you something warm to eat? Liam's stomach answered for him with a loud growl. Zoe smiled shyly. We're listening, Noah nodded, as long as we stay together. Ronnie smiled gently and placed the brooch into the inside pocket of his coat. I wouldn't have it any other way. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the pristine executive dining floor at the top of Morgan Tower. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the glittering Chicago skyline, bathed now in the deep blues and golds of early evening. But it wasn't the view that made Zoe's jaw drop, it was the smell. Warm bread, roasted vegetables, something savory bubbling in a pot. For a moment, all three children stood motionless just outside the elevator, unsure whether to step out. Their worn sneakers left faint traces of dust on the polished floor, their oversized jackets in weathered clothes in awkward contrast against the refined elegance of the space. But Ronnie stepped forward without saying a word, his posture gentle, his eyes soft. He motioned for them to follow. This place looks like a palace, Liam whispered under his breath, his eyes darting between chandeliers and leather chairs. He had never seen a restaurant without a menu taped to a wall, or a place where people actually smiled when they brought food. Zoe clutched Noah's hand tightly, trying not to show how overwhelmed she felt. The idea of sitting at a real table felt foreign, like something out of a storybook. But Noah, as always, remained calm. His free hand brushed against the wall as they walked, his fingers gliding smoothly along polished wood. A server dressed in black and white greeted Ronnie with a nod. Mr. Morgan, should I prepare your usual table? Not tonight, Ronnie replied. Set something for 4 by the window, please. Something warm. The man glanced at the three children, surprise flashing briefly across his face, but he said nothing, just gave a respectful nod and disappeared into the kitchen. Ronnie led them to a table in the far corner. It sat beside a massive window where the city lights sparkled like a million fireflies below. The chairs were so soft that when Zoe sank into hers, she almost didn't want to move again. Noah sat quietly, his expression unreadable, but his nose lifted ever so slightly, taking in the smells around him. They didn't speak much as the food arrived: warm rolls with butter, chicken stew, rich with herbs, mashed potatoes that melted in their mouths. Zoe's eyes filled with tears when she took her first bite, though she blinked them away before anyone noticed. Liam devoured everything in front of him, eyes darting nervously as if someone might take the plate away at any second. But it was Noah who brought the moment to a quiet stillness. He sat with his small hands wrapped around a steaming bowl of soup, his spoon moving slowly, carefully. After a few spoonfuls, he stopped, resting the bowl gently in front of him. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. It smells like safety here, he whispered. Ronnie, who had been watching silently from across the table, felt the words hit him deeper than he expected. It wasn't gratitude or awe in Noah's voice, it was recognition, as if the boy knew exactly what safety was and had lived so long without it that even a whiff of it now was enough to move him. The billionaire leaned forward slightly. Noah, he said gently, what does safety smell like? The blind boy tilted his head, thoughtful. Like warm bread, like clothes that don't smell like rain, like floors that don't creak when you sleep, like people who don't leave. Zoe looked down at her lap. Liam stopped eating for a moment. Ronnie swallowed the lump in his throat. And do you feel safe now? Noah didn't answer immediately. Then he gave a small nod. Almost. That word hung in the air, almost. So close, yet still out of reach. Ronnie didn't push. He didn't need to. He understood that trust for them had to be earned one moment at a time. The server returned with dessert, warm apple pie, and a pitcher of milk. Liam's eyes lit up. Zoe gasped quietly. Noah's fingers ran over the edge of the ceramic plate, and a content sigh escaped his lips. They ate slower now, the tension in their shoulders melting. For the first time in what felt like forever, no one was watching the clock. No one was listening for sirens or shuffling feet nearby. No one was guarding the last bite. After they finished, Ronnie stood and walked over to the window. The city looked endless, but somehow smaller now. He turned to the three children and said, "Would you like to stay here a while longer? You don't have to go back out tonight." Zoe looked at her brothers. Liam nodded slowly, eyes full of something close to disbelief. And Noah, ever the quiet compass of their little trio, gave the simplest, most hopeful answer of all. "Only if we stay together." Ronnie smiled. "Of course," he said. "That's the only way this works." And for the first time in years, in the heart of a building that had only ever stood for business power and ambition, something else bloomed, a quiet, fragile beginning to a new kind of family. That night, the city outside Ronnie Morgan's penthouse sparkled like it always did, clean, cold, glittering with lights that never seemed to go out. But inside, the atmosphere was different, warmer, quieter. Something had shifted. In the spacious guest suite just down the hall from his own bedroom, Liam, Zoe, and Noah lay curled up beneath fresh linens, wrapped in thick quilts that still carried the soft scent of lavender from the last time they were laundered. It was the first real bed they'd felt in months, maybe longer, and none of them dared believe it would still be there when they woke. Yet they had fallen asleep quickly, their breathing even and peaceful, their bodies finally allowed to rest without fear. Ronnie stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching them. Liam's hand was draped protectively over Zoe's shoulder. Noah in the middle slept on his side with both hands tucked beneath his chin. The soft rise and fall of their chests struck him in a way no business deal ever had. After he gently closed the door, Ronnie retreated to his own room. He shrugged off his jacket, loosened his tie, and dropped heavily onto the edge of the bed. In his hand, he still held the golden brooch. His mother's brooch, the ribbon-shaped pin he'd once nearly lost to the streets and somehow had found again through three children who had every reason not to care. His fingers closed around it tightly now, not from fear of losing it again, but because it tethered him to something far older and deeper than his billion-dollar empire memory. He leaned back into the pillows and stared at the ceiling, and then, as if pulled through time, he remembered the cold. Not the kind that slid in through cracks in glass towers or brushed your skin on brisk morning walks. No, this was the kind of cold that sank into your bones and didn't let go. The kind that came when you had nothing, no warmth, no roof, no one. He had been 17, a mouthful of anger and ideals. His father, Thomas Morgan, had handed him the family legacy like a contract one he was expected to sign without hesitation. But Ronnie had said no. He wanted to build something of his own. Something more than boardrooms and bottom lines. And in return, his father had slammed the door behind him, both literally and metaphorically. He had nowhere to go. That first night, Ronnie had slept in an abandoned train station outside Evanston. He remembered the stone floor digging into his ribs, the sound of rats skittering nearby, and the bitter wind that sliced through the broken windows. His hands had been too stiff to curl and his pride too loud to call anyone for help. He might have stayed out there longer, might have broken entirely, if not for her. His mother, Marianne, had found him 2 days later sitting on a bench in a public park, too exhausted to pretend he was fine. She didn't yell. She didn't scold. She just wrapped him in her long coat, pressed a thermos of warm tea into his shaking hands, and said the words he never forgot. "You can lose everything, Ronnie, but if you lose yourself, then nothing else matters." Later that week, when he finally returned home at her urging, she gave him the brooch. "This was supposed to be your father's," she had said, fastening it gently to his jacket. "But I made it for the one who chooses the harder path, the path with heart." That was the night Ronnie first understood that power meant nothing without compassion. But in the years that followed, when his mother passed too soon and the company demanded more of him than he was ready to give, he buried that part of himself. He followed the systems, climbed the ladders, built walls around his heart to keep from ever feeling that cold again. Until now. Ronnie sat up in bed, staring at the brooch in his palm, the same warmth Noah had spoken of. Ronnie felt it too now. The faint trace of love, of safety, of something sacred returned. He rose quietly and crossed to the window, looking out over the city. So many lights, so many people. And yet in all his years, none had shaken him quite like 3 8-year-old strangers who waited to return something they'd never owned. He thought of how Liam had sat tall and wary, trying to be the protector, of Zoe's sharp eyes and cautious heart, of Noah's calm presence, how he seemed to hear the world in ways others didn't. They reminded him of himself in pieces he'd long buried. Ronnie glanced down the hall toward the guest room. He thought of what they had endured, the hunger, the fear, the freezing nights. And still they had chosen honesty. He clenched the brooch tightly one last time, then gently placed it on the nightstand beside his bed. Tonight, for the first time in a long while, Ronnie Morgan wasn't sleeping in a house filled with silence. There were three small heartbeats not far away. And somewhere deep inside him, beneath the years of polished routines and corporate rituals, something thawed. The cold at last was beginning to fade. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows of Morgan Tower, like golden silk warming the quiet spaces where the city's most powerful usually walked in calculated silence. But on this morning, the air held a different kind of energy, gentler, more human. Ronnie Morgan stood by the tall window of the guest suite, a mug of coffee cooling in his hand, watching the triplets slowly stir from their first peaceful sleep in months. He had barely slept himself, not out of stress or business obligations, but because his mind had stayed busy with thoughts of the three children who had entered his life less than 24 hours earlier and somehow cracked open a door he hadn't realized he'd locked shut. Liam was the first to rise, stretching cautiously as if afraid the bed might vanish beneath him. Zoe woke next, blinking at the sunlight and then looking immediately to see if her brothers were still nearby. Noah remained curled in the blankets, a soft smile touching his lips as if he were dreaming of something kind. After breakfast, warm eggs, pancakes, and enough juice to fill all three children's stomachs, Ronnie didn't ask them to leave. He didn't put on the mask of the CEO. Instead, he made a different kind of offer. "How would you like to spend the day here?" he asked as they gathered their coats by the elevator. "I thought we could get you some clean clothes, maybe a few books, and I could show you around the office." "If you're curious," Zoe looked at him, cautious as ever. Why? Ronnie gave her a small smile. "Because people don't always get to see what's behind those glass doors." "And maybe you should." Liam glanced at his brother and sister. He was still trying to figure Ronnie out whether this man with his tailored shirts and quiet tone was really as genuine as he seemed. But Noah, as always, just nodded. "I'd like that," he said softly. The rest of the morning was something out of a dream. A car was sent to pick up new clothes from a boutique nearby, soft sweaters, warm coats, shoes that actually fit. The children took turns trying them on in the staff lounge, giggling when Liam accidentally buttoned his shirt backwards, and Zoe found herself in a jacket so fluffy she looked like a cloud. Later, Ronnie gave them a private tour of the office floor. Most of the employees had cleared out for a Saturday half-day, and those who remained were too stunned by the sight of their famously stoic CEO walking around with three wide-eyed children to say much. Ronnie introduced them to the art on the walls, the framed blueprints of his first major project, even the conference room where global deals were signed. But it was in his personal office, quiet, sunlit, and full of old books and photographs, that the moment came. Ronnie opened a drawer behind his desk and gently pulled out a small wooden music box. It was square dark oak with a delicate gold inlay and a tiny wind-up key on the side. He set it on the table before Noah. "This," he said, "belonged to my mother." Noah reached out slowly, his fingertips brushing over the surface. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "She used to keep it by her bedside," Ronnie continued. "Said it only played when someone truly believed something good was still possible." Noah tilted his head. "Does it still work?" Ronnie gave a soft smile. "Why don't you try?" With the lightest touch, Noah turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then gently the music began, a soft, haunting melody that filled the room like sunlight through sheer curtains. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Zoe's lips parted in wonder. Liam stood beside her, silent, but his hands curled into the edge of his new jacket, gripping it tightly. Something about the music stirred things none of them had words for. Noah leaned closer, his face calm, almost reverent. "It feels warm," he murmured. Ronnie crouched beside him. "That warmth, it's trust, Noah. It means something inside you still believes in kindness." Noah turned his head toward the sound of his voice. "I do. I think I always did, even when it was cold." Ronnie nodded. "Then this belongs to you now." Zoe gasped. "You're giving it to him." "It's yours," Ronnie confirmed. "My mother gave it to me to remember what mattered. I think you might understand it better than I ever did." Noah cradled the box against his chest as if it were something sacred. Zoe stepped closer to Ronnie. "Why are you doing all this?" He paused, then answered simply, "Because once someone did it for me when I needed it most." And because you three gave back something I didn't even realize I'd lost, not the brooch, but the part of myself I buried with it. They stood in silence for a while, letting the music play on. For the first time in a long time, there were no calculations in Ronnie's mind, no strategies, no deadlines, only the quiet rising hope that maybe this was the beginning of something bigger than business, something that sounded a lot like family. Ronnie Morgan had dealt with some of the most powerful institutions in the world, billion-dollar corporations, international banks, hardened boardrooms full of men twice his age. He knew how to navigate red tape, outmaneuver hostile mergers, and stare down government auditors without blinking. But nothing prepared him for the emotional weight of walking into the Department of Child and Family Services and asking for custody of three 8-year-old strangers. The receptionist looked up confused when he gave his name. "Yes, I'm that Ronnie Morgan," he said, offering his ID in a grim smile. "And yes, I'm here for a custody matter." The room smelled like paperwork and nervous sweat. Families whispered in corners. Social workers shuffled by with overstuffed folders, and children stared out of windows with eyes that had seen far too much. Ronnie stood there dressed in a dark suit and cashmere coat, looking like a visitor from another planet. But he wasn't here to donate. He wasn't here to make a speech. He was here to fight. 2 days earlier, he'd brought Liam, Zoe, and Noah into his home after their first full night of sleep in months. The morning after their tour of Morgan Tower, he had spoken quietly with his legal team and told them what he intended to do. "I want full guardianship," he said. "Start with emergency custody." They had blinked in disbelief. Ronnie, one of his top attorneys, began cautiously, "Do you understand what this entails? You're talking about children. This isn't like acquiring a company." "No," Ronnie replied, voice firm. "It's more important than that." Now sitting in a government-issued chair across from two skeptical social workers, Ronnie kept his tone even. He explained the situation, how the children had been living unsheltered since their parents died in a fire, how they had evaded the system out of fear of separation, how they had returned a valuable item without taking a single penny, and how they had asked for nothing, only that they not be split apart. He spoke not like a CEO, but like someone who had once been lost himself. The senior caseworker, Mrs. Rivera, furrowed her brow. "Mr. Morgan, I understand your concern, but emergency guardianship is usually reserved for family members or certified foster homes. You're neither. I'm prepared to meet any requirements," he said. "And if approved, it would only be temporary," she added. "The state would still evaluate longer-term placement." "I understand," he said quietly, "but I'm asking for that time. Time to prove that I'm capable of giving them what they need." A second social worker, Mr. Crane, leaned forward. "These children are closely bonded, but the department's protocol is to assess them individually. There may be different needs, emotional or developmental. We may decide that placing them separately." Ronnie raised a hand, his voice suddenly sharp. "No." The room went still. He took a breath and continued more evenly. "You don't know what they've been through. They've lost their parents, their home, their sense of safety. The only thing they've had is each other. And you want to take that too," Mr. Morgan Rivera said carefully. "I know this is emotional, but they stay together," he said unwavering, "or they come with me. That's the only option I'll consider." Crane exchanged a glance with Rivera. "We'll need to speak with the children." "Of course," Ronnie replied, "but I ask you to do it here in my presence." Later that afternoon, the children were brought into a side room with the two caseworkers. Ronnie sat close enough to hear, but far enough to give them space. Liam sat upright like a soldier. Zoe held Noah's hand and answered the questions with a soft fierceness that made Ronnie's chest ache. And Noah, ever calm, ever grounded, simply said, "We don't want to be split up again. If we can't stay together, we'd rather go back outside." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a performance. It was truth. The interviews wrapped. Paperwork was signed. And after hours of back and forth legal reviews and background checks, the department reluctantly granted Ronnie temporary guardianship pending further evaluation. He exhaled deeply for the first time in hours. A victory, not permanent, but a door cracked open. That night, back in his penthouse, he broke the news gently. "You're staying here for now," he told them. "Officially." Zoe blinked. "Really?" Liam narrowed his eyes. "They're not splitting us up." Ronnie shook his head. Not if I can help it. Noah just smiled. They didn't cheer. They didn't jump or clap. They'd been let down too many times to celebrate too soon. But their eyes softened, their shoulders relaxed. And that night, as they settled into warm beds with new pajamas and full bellies, they finally let themselves believe just a little that maybe they were no longer alone. Ronnie stood in the hallway outside their rooms, listening to the silence, to the faint sounds of breathing and dreams. His phone buzzed, a message from his head of PR. Do you want to issue a statement about the children? The media will find out eventually. He stared at the screen, then turned it off without replying. This wasn't about optics. It wasn't about headlines. It was about restoring something he himself had once lost and watching it begin to bloom again in the eyes of three children who had never asked for anything except to stay together. Ronnie Morgan had faced markets mergers and media storms. But this was the fight that mattered. And he wasn't backing down. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel sparkled with light. Hundreds of Chicago's most powerful figures had gathered for Morgan Dynamics' annual gala, a tradition marked by speeches, celebrations, and unveilings of ambitious new projects. Waiters in black and white moved like shadows between crystal chandeliers and the low hum of conversation. The media watched closely, as they always did, cameras clicking whenever Ronnie Morgan appeared in frame. But tonight, something was different. Ronnie stood at the far end of the room, just behind the velvet curtain, separating the private corridor from the main stage. His reflection stared back at him in the mirror across the hall. A tailored midnight blue suit, crisp white shirt, patent leather shoes shined to a mirror finish. But the thing that caught the light and caught the eye was pinned over his heart. The golden ribbon-shaped brooch, polished, restored, anchored carefully in place. It glowed gently in the ballroom light, the way it had the first day his mother gave it to him. He touched it now, briefly grounding himself. And then he turned as a soft voice whispered, "Mr. Morgan, you're up in 3. He nodded. The MC finished their introduction. Applause rolled in, polite but expectant, and Ronnie stepped forward into the light. He approached the podium slowly, the room falling to a respectful hush. This wasn't just any gala. This was the 20th anniversary of Morgan Dynamics' global expansion. The press expected numbers. The board expected strategy. The city expected celebration. But Ronnie had something else in mind. He looked out at the crowd, hands resting calmly on either side of the podium. He didn't begin with data or accomplishments or forecasts. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Tonight I'd like to talk about something I lost." The silence deepened. He glanced down at the brooch, then back to the sea of faces. "A few weeks ago, I dropped something outside this very building." He said, voice quiet but steady. It was small, just a pin, but not just any pin. It belonged to my mother. She gave it to me the morning I took over this company, and she told me, "This is a reminder of who you are, of where you come from, and of what you must carry." He paused. For years, I wore it beneath my jacket. I never showed it, never spoke about it, but it was always there, until one day it wasn't. A murmur rippled through the audience. People leaned in. Ronnie continued, "I thought I'd lost a thing, an item. But what I didn't realize was I'd lost a part of myself long before that brooch ever slipped from my coat." He stepped back slightly, lifting his hand to gently touch the pin once more, and it was 3 strangers who returned it to me. 3 children, in fact, 8 years old. Triplets, homeless, hungry, but more courageous than most people I've ever met. He gestured toward the edge of the stage. "And they're here tonight, soon." Gasps rose, heads turned, a spotlight shifted slowly, revealing 3 small figures at a table near the front. Liam, in a simple gray suit that made him stand a little taller than usual. Zoe in a navy blue dress with a white ribbon in her hair, and Noah sitting calmly between them in a soft brown jacket, his small hand resting on the music box Ronnie had given him. The audience didn't applaud immediately. They stared because something in their presence quieted the room. It wasn't just their age, it was their stillness, their dignity. Ronnie continued, "These children found my brooch in a gutter. They could have sold it, walked away, but they didn't. They waited on a bench in the cold, hoping someone would come back for it. And when I did, they gave it to me freely. Not because they knew who I was or what it was worth, but because they knew it mattered to someone." His voice wavered slightly, but he kept going. "I didn't know then how much they would come to matter to me. Now there were tears in more than a few eyes. They didn't just return something I'd lost. They reminded me of who I was before I put on these suits, before I stood in rooms like this. They reminded me that compassion isn't weakness, that family can be formed in the most unexpected ways, and that sometimes the smallest hands can carry the greatest truths. He looked back out at the crowd, this time not as a CEO, but as a man who had rediscovered something he thought was gone forever. This brooch was lost, but I was too, and three brave hearts brought us both back. Applause erupted, not the polite, obligatory kind, but thunderous, rising, genuine. The spotlight returned to the children's table where Zoe had reached over to hold Noah's hand, and Liam's chin lifted just a little higher. They didn't seem surprised by the praise. They weren't overwhelmed by the attention. They simply were present, strong, whole. As the audience stood to applaud, Ronnie stepped from the podium and made his way down the stairs. He crouched beside the children's table, smiling softly. I meant every word he said quietly. Liam nodded. We know. Zoe leaned closer. Does this mean we have to dress fancy all the time now? Ronnie chuckled, eyes wet. Only if you want to. Then he turned to Noah, who still held the music box in his lap. The boy's sightless eyes looked toward Ronnie as if he could sense the exact location of the warmth in the room. You wore the brooch, Noah said simply. Ronnie placed a hand over it. It felt right again. Noah smiled. It sounds right too. And as the crowd continued to applaud, cameras flashing, reporters scrambling to rewrite their coverage, Ronnie Morgan stood there not as a man on a pedestal, but as one grounded by love, humbled by fate, and rebuilt by three children who had taught him that the truest riches in life often come from the smallest hands and the quietest acts. The brooch had returned, but so had he. The days that followed the gala unfolded like chapters in a story the triplets never dared imagine would be written for them, each one etched with warmth, possibility, and a sense of belonging they hadn't known since the night the fire took their parents and the world had turned cold. For the first time in their 8 years, Noah, Liam, and Zoe were no longer just surviving. They were living. It began quietly without fanfare. One morning, Ronnie called them into his study. They climbed onto the plush couch, still a little shy in his presence, though the stiffness had softened. They now knew which drawer in the kitchen had the extra cookies, and that Ronnie didn't mind if they left their shoes at the door in a tangle. That morning, Ronnie sat across from them, holding a simple folder. I've started something, he said, placing it on the table between them. It's called the Morning Light Foundation. Named after the three of you. Zoe blinked. Us. Yes, Ronnie nodded. The idea came to me because of what you did, how you lived, how you held on to your values even when the world didn't give you anything. This foundation will help children like you, homeless, scared, overlooked. It'll provide shelter, education, support, and most of all, it'll keep siblings together. Liam leaned forward, eyes wide. Like, other kids won't have to hide from the system like we did. No, Ronnie said gently. Not if we do this right. Zoe looked down, overcome by something that felt like relief but more powerful. She felt like her pain had been turned into purpose. And Noah, sitting quietly beside her, smiled, his face tilted slightly, as if the air around him had just changed. He didn't need to see the room to know how it felt. That was the beginning of Noah's new world. The next day, a woman arrived at the penthouse, a calm, kind presence, with short red hair and a tote bag filled with textured books. Her name was Elena, and she was a Braille specialist. Noah greeted her with a soft hello, and within minutes, the two of them were sitting side by side at the breakfast nook, his fingers tracing the raised dots as she guided him through the first letters of his name. For hours, he sat there, head bent in focus, his hands sweeping over the page like they were learning the shape of a future he'd never been allowed to dream about. Zoe watched from the doorway, amazed. Noah, who had always seen the world in ways they didn't understand, now had a way to read it too. When Elena packed up that first day, she left him with a single word printed in Braille: hope. Noah slept with it under his pillow. Meanwhile, Liam, who had always taken the role of protector, found himself walking into a classroom for the first time in 2 years. A small progressive school just blocks away from Morgan Tower had agreed to take him in. Ronnie personally spoke with the principal, ensuring they understood where Liam had come from and where he was going. Liam's first day was filled with nervous glances and hands shoved in his pockets. But by lunchtime, a boy with spiky hair had challenged him to a race across the playground. Liam lost. Then he laughed. It was the beginning of friendship, and a quiet discovery that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders anymore. Not alone. Zoe, always the watcher, the one who stood back and noticed things others missed, began to find her voice through something unexpected: art. Ronnie noticed the scribbles she left behind. Napkin doodles, chalk sketches on the balcony tiles. Tiny paper drawings slipped under his office door. One day he surprised her with a full set of colored pencils, sketchbooks, and a real easel. She didn't say much, just stared at it eyes wide, then whispered, "You really got this." For me, Ronnie had crouched beside her and nodded. "Your eyes see stories. You deserve a way to tell them." And she did. Her first drawing was of the music box. Her second was of Noah reading with Elena. Her third was of the three of them hand in hand standing in the glow of the city skyline with a golden ribbon shining in the background. When she showed Ronnie, he didn't speak for a long time. He simply put a hand on her shoulder and said, "You're already changing the world, Zoe." The days turned into weeks, and routines began to settle like soft snow. Mornings were filled with breakfast together, Noah's Braille lessons, Liam's stories from school, Zoe's new sketches taped to the fridge. Ronnie, once buried in boardrooms and quarterly reviews, now found himself rushing home to hear about Zoe's newest character, or Noah's progress, or whether Liam had scored a goal at recess. The penthouse, once cold and pristine, now held laughter, chaos, life, and love. At night, when the city quieted and the lights dimmed, Ronnie would sometimes stand at the doorway to the children's rooms and listen. The soft rustle of pages, a shared joke, Zoe whispering a made-up bedtime story while Liam pretended not to be crying from laughter. And in Noah's room, a soft tune would sometimes play from the music box, its melody drifting through the halls like a lullaby the building had never heard before. It wasn't perfect. Some nights were harder than others. There were still bad dreams, questions about the past, and moments of fear when someone slammed a door too loudly or when thunder cracked the sky. But they were no longer hiding, no longer surviving in silence. They were healing, together. One evening, Ronnie sat with Noah on the balcony, the city humming beneath them. "Do you ever miss the way things were?" Ronnie asked gently. Noah thought for a long moment, then replied, "Sometimes. I miss them. Our mom and dad. I don't miss the streets." Ronnie nodded. "That's fair." But even when it was hard, Noah continued, "I knew we'd find something. Or someone." Ronnie looked at him, touched by the certainty in his small voice. "You were that someone," Noah said softly. The city lights reflected in Ronnie's eyes. He didn't reply right away. He just reached over and held Noah's hand in his steady, warm sure. In the end, Noah had found something far more valuable than vision. He'd found home. And it wasn't just a place. It was a world filled with music books. He could finally read voices he trusted, hands that held him, and a man who'd once lost everything, but found his way back through the courage of three hearts that refused to give up. The sky over Chicago was painted in deep shades of violet and gold as dusk settled over the skyline. From the penthouse balcony of Morgan Tower, the hum of the city sounded distant, soft, almost like a lullaby. Inside, the evening had unfolded like most others. Lately, dinner together at the long oak table, Zoe showing off her latest drawing, a surprisingly accurate portrait of Liam with a crooked grin in a brief scuffle over who got the last piece of cornbread. Normalcy, something none of them had ever believed they'd know. But now the apartment had grown quiet. Ronnie Morgan moved through the softly lit hallway barefoot, dressed in a plain sweater and slacks. He'd just finished sorting through foundation proposals in his office, but something pulled at him, an unspoken feeling that someone was still awake. As he passed the reading nook near the large curved window, he saw the small figure seated there. Noah, the 8-year-old, sat cross-legged on the cushion, his forehead resting lightly against the glass. The city lights sparkled before him in a kaleidoscope of colors he couldn't see, but somehow seemed to feel. His hand rested gently on the windowsill, fingers tapping a quiet, thoughtful rhythm. Ronnie paused in the doorway, watching him in silence for a moment. There was something timeless in the boy's stillness, like he was part of the skyline itself, built from memory and mystery. Finally, Ronnie walked over and sat down beside him. Noah didn't flinch. He smiled, recognizing his presence instantly. "You're up late," Ronnie said gently. "I like how it sounds at night," Noah replied. "The world gets quieter, but not empty. Just calmer." Ronnie followed his gaze out the window, though he knew Noah wasn't truly looking. You always know how to explain things better than most adults I know. Noah shrugged modestly. I listen a lot. There was a pause between them, comfortable and full. Then Ronnie reached into his sweater pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped carefully in a velvet cloth. He let it sit in his palm for a moment before speaking. Can I ask you something? Ronnie said, his voice quieter now. Noah turned his head toward him. Of course. Ronnie looked down at the brooch, the golden ribbon polished and warm to the touch, and then back at the boy who had found it in a gutter and given it back without asking for anything in return. That day, Ronnie said slowly, when you found this, why did you return it? You didn't know me. You didn't know what it was. You were hungry. You could have traded it for food or shelter or anything. Noah didn't answer right away. His brow furrowed slightly as if weighing the words carefully. Then in his soft, steady voice he replied, because sometimes when you give something back, you find something better. Ronnie felt something stir in his chest, an ache that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with recognition. He looked down at the brooch in his hand. How much of his life had been defined by holding on too tightly? His career, his image, his grief. He placed the brooch gently in Noah's small palm. Noah's fingers closed around it with care, his thumb brushing over its delicate curve. Like me, Ronnie said quietly. Noah tilted his head, smiling. Yes, he whispered, like you. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Just outside the window, the lights of Chicago blinked on like stars, one by one stretching toward the horizon. Ronnie leaned back against the wall, arms folded. You know, when I was younger, I thought the only way to get ahead in life was to keep climbing. Don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't let anyone see you fall. But that path, it gets cold after a while. Noah nodded. It's easy to get lost when you stop feeling. Ronnie turned his head slightly amused. You're 8. I've had time to think, Noah replied with a quiet grin. Ronnie chuckled softly, then let out a long breath. You gave me something, Noah. You, Zoe and Liam. You gave me something I didn't know and I'd lost. Not just the brooch, but the ability to feel something real again. Noah leaned against him, gently resting his shoulder against Ronnie's arm. I think you were always real, he said. You just forgot where to look. Outside, the wind shifted. The faint honk of a taxi horn echoed in the distance. Somewhere in the building, a clock chimed the hour. Ronnie looked down at Noah, who was still holding the brooch, his mother's brooch, over his heart. And suddenly he realized he didn't need to wear it anymore. Not because it no longer mattered, but because what it symbolized had already returned. The strength, the compassion, the identity. Noah, Zoe, and Liam had helped him remember, and they had helped him begin again. Ronnie stood and gently ruffled Noah's hair. Come on. Time for bed. Noah rose with him, still clutching the brooch carefully. As they walked down the hallway together, their footsteps soft against the hardwood floor, Ronnie reached down and took Noah's hand in his. A quiet gesture. A promise. Not long ago, this home had echoed with nothing but silence and status. Now it carried laughter, footsteps, music, and the unmistakable sound of hearts mending. When Ronnie tucked Noah into bed, he sat for a moment longer, watching the boy place the brooch beside his music box. Will you wear it again? Noah asked sleepily. Ronnie smiled. No, I think it's yours now. Noah's eyes fluttered closed and he whispered, then I'll keep it safe. And as Ronnie turned off the lamp and stepped out into the hallway, he knew the circle was complete. What had been lost had been returned. What had been broken had been rebuilt. And what had once been cold was warm again. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.